I need to tell you something about Pisces that most people completely misunderstand. And honestly, this realization changed everything I thought I knew about this sign. Everyone assumes Pisces forgives everything. They're the compassionate ones, the empathetic healers, the sign that sees the good in everyone no matter what. But here's what nobody talks about. There are specific things Pisces will never forgive. Not in a loud, dramatic way, not with confrontation or revenge, but in a quiet, permanent way that's actually more devastating than any outburst could ever be. If you've ever felt like a Pisces suddenly went cold on you, like they're physically present but emotionally gone, or if you're a Pisces yourself and you've noticed this pattern where certain betrayals just never healed, stay with me. Because what I'm about to share isn't just astrology theory. This is about the deep psychological architecture of how Pisces processes pain, and why certain wounds never close. Here's the thing that's been on my mind lately. I've been observing this pattern across dozens of Pisces individuals, and it's remarkably consistent. There are 2.5 specific things that create permanent emotional scars in Pisces. And when I say 2.5, I mean there are 2 absolute deal breakers and one that exists in this gray area that depends entirely on context. But once you understand what these are, so much about Pisces behavior suddenly makes sense. The ghosting, the withdrawal, the way they can be your best friend one day and a polite stranger the next. Most people think Pisces holds grudges because they're weak or overly sensitive. But that's not what's happening at all. I really believe what looks like a grudge is actually something much deeper. It's a survival mechanism. It's the moment when Pisces' infinite capacity for forgiveness finally hits a wall, and their entire system says no more. This person is not safe, and once that switch flips, there's no going back. Now, before we get into the specific things Pisces can't forgive, you need to understand something fundamental about how this sign operates emotionally. Because without this context, the rest won't make sense. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. It's the culmination of all 11 signs that came before it. And what that means psychologically is that Pisces carries this deep, almost cellular understanding of human suffering. They've seen it all. They feel it all. They understand why people hurt each other, why people lied, why people betray. And because of that understanding, Pisces has this extraordinary capacity for forgiveness. They can look at someone who hurt them and genuinely see the wounded child inside that person. They can understand the circumstances, the trauma, the fear that lead to the betrayal. And most of the time, that understanding translates into forgiveness. They let it go. They give second chances. They believe in redemption. But here's where it gets complicated. That same depth of understanding means Pisces also knows when someone is beyond redemption. They can feel when someone's actions aren't coming from woundedness but from something darker. Manipulation, exploitation, calculated cruelty. And when Pisces encounters that, when they realize they're dealing with someone who isn't just hurt but actively harmful, something shifts. The compassion doesn't disappear, but it gets redirected. Away from the person who hurt them and toward themselves. I've noticed this happens in stages. First, there's the initial hurt. Pisces feels it deeply, more deeply than most signs would. But they don't react immediately. They go inward. They process. They try to understand. They give the benefit of the doubt. They might even forgive the first time, the second time, the third time. But they're keeping score in a way that's invisible to everyone else. They're watching patterns. They're feeling for authenticity. They're testing whether this person is capable of real change or just performing remorse. And here's what most people don't realize. Pisces isn't naive. That's the biggest misconception. People see their kindness and assume they're gullible, that they can't see through lies. But Pisces sees everything. They just choose to give people room to grow. They choose to believe in potential, until they don't. The moment Pisces decides you're not safe, it's over. Not in a dramatic way. There's no big confrontation, no screaming match. No public call out. They just quietly close the door, and that door doesn't reopen. You might not even notice at first. They'll still be polite. They'll still respond to your messages. But the warmth is gone. The depth is gone. You've been moved from the inner circle to the outer perimeter, and you're never getting back in. So what are these specific things that trigger this permanent shutdown? What crosses the line from forgivable to unforgivable in the Pisces psyche? Let me break down the first one, because this is the most common and the most misunderstood. The first thing Pisces will never forgive is weaponizing their vulnerability against them. And I really need you to understand what this means. Because it's not just about betraying a secret or gossiping. It's much more specific than that. Pisces is a deeply vulnerable sign. They share their inner world with very few people. And when they do share, when they let you see their fears, their insecurities, their dreams, their pain, they're giving you something sacred. They're trusting you with the most tender parts of themselves. And here's what makes this so devastating when it's violated. Pisces doesn't just share information with you, they share their soul. When a Pisces tells you about their childhood trauma, or their secret fear of abandonment, or their dream that everyone else laughed at, they're not making small talk. They're inviting you into their inner sanctuary. They're saying, I trust you enough to be completely undefended with you. Now imagine what happens when that trust is weaponized. When the thing they shared in confidence gets used against them in an argument. When their vulnerability becomes ammunition. When their deepest fear gets mocked or dismissed or thrown in their face during a conflict. That's not just a betrayal of trust. For Pisces, that's a betrayal of their entire being. I've seen this play out in so many ways. The Pisces who confides in a friend about their struggle with anxiety, only to have that friend later say something like, "You're just being anxious again. Stop overreacting." The Pisces who shares their creative dreams with a partner, only to have that partner use those dreams as evidence of their impracticality during a fight. The Pisces who opens up about past trauma, only to have someone weaponize that trauma by saying, "No wonder you're so messed up." Each of these moments might seem small to the person doing it. They might not even realize how deeply they've cut. But for Pisces, it's a fundamental violation. Because what you're saying in that moment is, I see your vulnerability, and I'm choosing to hurt you with it. You're taking the gift they gave you and turning it into a weapon. And here's what happens next. Pisces doesn't explode. They don't fight back. They just go quiet. They retreat. And in that retreat, they're making a decision. They're realizing that you're not safe. That the sanctuary they created with you was an illusion. That you were never really holding their vulnerability with care. You were just waiting for a moment when you could use it to your advantage. The thing about Pisces is they can forgive almost anything if they believe it came from a place of unconscious woundedness. If you lash out because you're hurt, they get it. If you make a mistake because you're scared, they understand. But weaponizing their vulnerability isn't unconscious. It's a choice. It's a calculated move to gain power in a moment of conflict. And Pisces can feel that calculation. They can sense the difference between someone who's reacting from pain and someone who's strategically deploying their intimate knowledge to inflict maximum damage. Once Pisces realizes you're capable of that, once they see that you'll use their openness as a weapon, they can't unsee it. The trust is broken in a way that can't be repaired. Because how do you ever be vulnerable with someone again when you know they'll use it against you the next time things get hard? You don't. You just stop sharing. You stop opening up. You become polite and distant and emotionally unavailable. Not because you're holding a grudge, but because you're protecting yourself from someone who's proven they can't be trusted with your tenderness. I've talked to so many Pisces about this, and the pattern is always the same. They'll say something like, I can forgive them for what they did, but I can't forget that they're capable of doing it. And that's the key. It's not about holding on to anger. It's about accepting a fundamental truth about someone's character. When you weaponize your Pisces' vulnerability, you're showing them who you really are, and Pisces believes you. This is why you'll see Pisces maintain surface-level relationships with people who've crossed this line. They'll be friendly at gatherings. They'll respond to texts. They'll even help you if you ask. But you'll never get close again. You'll never get access to their inner world again. Because they've learned that you can't be trusted with it. And Pisces would rather be alone than be vulnerable with someone who's proven they'll use that vulnerability as a weapon. The second thing Pisces will never forgive is even more subtle. And honestly, I think this is the one that confuses people the most. Because on the surface, it doesn't look like a big deal. But for Pisces, it's absolutely devastating. And that's dismissing their intuition or gaslighting their emotional reality. Let me explain what I mean by this. Because it's not just about disagreeing with a Pisces or having a different perspective. It's about something much more fundamental. Pisces is ruled by Neptune, the planet of intuition, dreams, and the unseen realms. And what that means practically is that Pisces has this extraordinary ability to sense things that aren't visible on the surface. They feel energy. They pick up on subtext. They know when something is off. Even if they can't articulate exactly what or why. And here's the thing about that gift. It's not always logical. Pisces can't always explain how they know what they know. They just know. They feel it in their body. They sense it in the atmosphere. They pick up on micro-expressions and tonal shifts and the things people aren't saying. And most of the time, they're right. Not because they're psychic, though some Pisces would argue they are, but because they're paying attention to layers of reality that most people ignore. Now imagine what happens when someone dismisses that. When a Pisces says, something feels off about this person, and you respond with, you're just being paranoid. When they say, I have a bad feeling about this situation, and you say, you're overthinking it. Stop being so emotional. When they express concern about something they're sensing, and you tell them they're imagining things, being too sensitive, or making problems where none exist, what you're doing in that moment, whether you realize it or not, is gaslighting their entire way of perceiving reality. You're telling them that their primary navigation system, the thing they rely on to move through the world, is broken. You're saying, your feelings aren't real, your intuition isn't valid, your perception can't be trusted. And for Pisces, that's not just invalidating, it's destabilizing. Because if they can't trust their own intuition, what can they trust? Their entire sense of self is built on their ability to feel and sense and know things that others miss. When you dismiss that, you're not just disagreeing with them, you're attacking their core identity. I've seen this play out in relationships where a Pisces expresses discomfort about a partner's friend, and the partner responds with vet. You're just jealous. There's nothing going on. And then months later, it turns out the Pisces was right. There was something going on. But by that point, the damage is done. Because the Pisces spent months being told they were crazy, paranoid, insecure, when they were actually picking up on real signals that everyone else was missing. Or in work situations where a Pisces senses that a project is going to fail or that a colleague can't be trusted, and they're dismissed as negative or not a team player, and then the project does fail, or the colleague does betray the team, and the Pisces is left thinking, I knew, I told them, and they made me feel like I was the problem. This pattern of being right but being dismissed creates a deep wound in Pisces. Because it's not just about being proven correct. It's about the fact that the people they trusted chose to invalidate their reality rather than consider that maybe, just maybe, Pisces was picking up on something real. And here's what makes this particularly unforgivable for Pisces. When their intuition is repeatedly dismissed, they start to doubt themselves. They start to think, maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I am imagining things. Maybe there's something wrong with me. And that self-doubt is toxic for a sign that relies so heavily on their inner knowing. It's like asking a bird to doubt its ability to fly. You're not just questioning a skill. You're questioning their fundamental nature. I've talked to Pisces who've been in relationships where this happened consistently, and they describe it as a form of psychological torture. Because every time they sense something and speak up about it, They're met with dismissal or mockery. And over time, they learn to stop trusting themselves. They learn to ignore their intuition. They learn to override their gut feelings in favor of what other people tell them is real. And then something happens. The thing they sensed all along comes to light. The person they had a bad feeling about reveals their true colors. The situation they warned about unfolds exactly as they feared. And in that moment, Pisces realizes two things simultaneously. Their intuition was right all along. And two, the person who dismissed them chose to invalidate their reality rather than trust them. That second realization is what makes this unforgivable. Because it's not just about being wrong. Everyone is wrong sometimes. It's about the fact that when Pisces was vulnerable enough to share their intuitive knowing, when they trusted you enough to say, "This is what I'm sensing," you chose to make them feel crazy rather than consider that they might be picking up on something you couldn't see. And here's the thing that really gets me about this. In most cases, the person dismissing the Pisces isn't doing it maliciously. They genuinely don't understand how Pisces perceives the world. They think they're being rational, logical, helping Pisces not worry so much. But the impact is the same. You're telling Pisces that their primary way of navigating reality is invalid. And once you do that enough times, once you've made them doubt themselves enough, they can't trust you anymore. Because here's what Pisces realizes in those moments. If you can't respect my intuition, if you can't honor my emotional reality even when you don't understand it, then you can't really see me. You're in love with or friends with or working with some version of me that you've created in your head. A version that's more logical, more rational, more like you. But that's not who I am. And if you can't accept who I actually am, then this relationship is built on a lie. I've seen Pisces walk away from decades-long friendships over this. Not because of one incident, but because of a pattern of their feelings being dismissed, their intuition being mocked, their emotional reality being invalidated. And the breaking point usually comes when Pisces realizes that this person will never see them clearly. They'll never respect the way Pisces moves through the world. They'll always think Pisces is too much these, too sensitive, too emotional, too intuitive. And once Pisces accepts that, once they see that you're fundamentally incapable of honoring their reality, they let you go. Not with anger, not with drama, just with this quiet, sad acceptance that you were never really seeing them at all. And that's a kind of loneliness that Pisces won't tolerate anymore. They'd rather be alone than be with someone who makes them feel crazy for being exactly who they are. The thing about this particular betrayal is that it's cumulative. One instance of dismissing a Pisces' intuition might be forgivable. They might think, okay, they just don't understand. They're coming from a different place. But when it becomes a pattern, when every time Pisces expresses a feeling or a concern or an intuitive hit, they're met with skepticism or dismissal, that's when the damage becomes permanent. Because what Pisces learns in those moments is that you don't trust them. You don't trust their perception. You don't trust their judgment. You don't trust their ability to read situations and people. And if you don't trust those things, you don't trust the core of who they are. And Pisces can't be in relationship with someone who doesn't trust them at that fundamental level. I've noticed that Pisces who've experienced this kind of invalidation often become very selective about who they share their intuitive insights with. They learn to keep their knowing to themselves. They learn to trust their gut but not voice it. They learn to protect their inner world from people who can't respect it. And that's a survival mechanism. But it's also a loss. Because when Pisces stops sharing their intuition, everyone loses access to their gift. Now let me talk about the half. The 2.5 thing. This is the one that exists in a gray area. And whether it's forgivable or not depends entirely on the context and the relationship. And that's choosing someone else over them in a moment of crisis. Here's what I mean by this. Pisces is incredibly loyal. When they love you, when they're committed to you, they will show up for you in ways that most people can't even imagine. They'll drop everything to be there for you. They'll sacrifice their own needs to support yours. They'll hold space for your pain, your fear, your chaos. They're the friend who shows up at 3 in the morning. They're the partner who stays through the breakdown. They're the family member who never gives up on you. But here's what Pisces needs in return. They need to know that when they're in crisis, when they're the one falling apart, you'll be there too. They need to know that the loyalty goes both ways, that the support is reciprocal, that when they finally ask for help, which they rarely do, you'll show up. And when you don't, when you choose someone or something else over them in their moment of need, that cuts deep. Because Pisces has been there for you countless times. They've rearranged their life to accommodate your crises. They've put their own needs on hold to support yours. And the one time they need you, you're not there. Now here's where the gray area comes in. This isn't always unforgivable. It depends on why you weren't there. If you had a legitimate emergency, if you were dealing with your own crisis, if you genuinely couldn't be there, Pisces will understand. They're not unreasonable. They know life is complicated. They know sometimes timing doesn't work out. But if you chose not to be there, if you prioritized something less important, if you made a conscious decision that whatever else was happening was more valuable than showing up for them, that's different. That's when it becomes unforgivable. Because what you're saying in that moment is that all the times Pisces showed up for you, all the sacrifices they made, all the support they gave, it wasn't worth reciprocating. You took their loyalty for granted. You assumed they'd always be there, so you didn't need to be there for them. I've seen this happen in so many ways. The Pisces who's always been the emotional support for their friend group, and then when they're going through a divorce or a loss, everyone is suddenly too busy. The Pisces who supported their partner through career struggles and health issues, and then when they need support, the partner is checked out or resentful. The Pisces who's been the family caretaker, and when they finally break down, everyone acts like it's an inconvenience. What makes this particularly painful for Pisces is the asymmetry. They've given so much, and they're not asking for equal return. They're just asking for something. Some acknowledgement that they matter too. Some evidence that the relationship isn't just about what they can provide. And when that doesn't come, when they realize they've been giving to people who won't give back, it's devastating. But here's why this is only a half on the list of unforgivable things. Because sometimes, people do show up late. Sometimes they realize they messed up and they make amends. Sometimes they didn't understand how much Pisces needed them until it was almost too late. And if someone comes back, if they genuinely apologize, if they make a real effort to repair the damage and show up differently going forward, Pisces can forgive this one. Not easily, not quickly, but it's possible. Because Pisces understands that people make mistakes. They understand that sometimes people don't realize what they have until they almost lose it. They understand that growth is messy and non-linear. So if you come back with genuine remorse and changed behavior, if you prove that you've learned from the mistake, Pisces might let you back in. But here's the catch. You only get one chance at this. If you do it again, if you establish a pattern of not showing up when Pisces needs you to, if you prove that your apology was just words and not actual change, then it moves from the half category to the full category. It becomes unforgivable. Because at that point, Pisces realizes you're not capable of reciprocal loyalty. You're only capable of taking. And Pisces won't stay in a one-sided relationship forever. I've noticed that Pisces often gives people multiple chances on this one. They'll forgive the first time you don't show up. They'll make excuses for you. They'll tell themselves you were busy. You didn't understand. You'll do better next time. But they're watching. They're keeping track. And if the pattern continues, if you keep choosing other things over them, if you keep taking their support without offering any in return, eventually they'll stop asking. They'll stop reaching out. They'll stop expecting anything from you. And that's when you've lost them. Not because they're holding a grudge, but because they've accepted that you're not capable of being the kind of person they need in their life. They've realized that the relationship is fundamentally unbalanced, and they're not willing to keep pouring energy into something that doesn't nourish them back. What's interesting about this half category is that it reveals something important about Pisces' capacity for forgiveness. They can forgive almost anything if they believe the person is genuinely trying to change, genuinely remorseful, genuinely committed to doing better. But they can't forgive a pattern. They can't forgive someone who keeps making the same mistake over and over while expecting Pisces to keep accepting it. Because here's what Pisces understands that a lot of people don't. Forgiveness isn't about pretending something didn't hurt. It's not about forgetting or minimizing or making excuses. Real forgiveness is about accepting what happened, processing the pain, and then making a conscious choice about whether this person has earned continued access to your life. And sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes people do change. Sometimes they do learn. Sometimes they do become capable of the reciprocity that Pisces needs. But sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes people show you over and over again that they're not capable of meeting you where you are. And when that happens, when Pisces realizes that you're never going to be able to give them what they need, they let you go, not with anger, not with resentment, just with this quiet, sad acceptance that you are who you are, and who you are isn't compatible with who they need in their life. And once Pisces reaches that conclusion, once they've made peace with the fact that you can't give them what they need, there's no going back. The door closes. The chapter ends, and you become someone they used to know. I think what confuses people about Pisces is that they expect drama. They expect confrontation. They expect Pisces to tell them exactly what they did wrong and give them a chance to defend themselves. But that's not how Pisces operates. By the time you realize Pisces has pulled away, they've already processed everything internally. They've already gone through the stages of hurt, confusion, anger, and acceptance. They've already made their decision. And that decision isn't about punishing you. It's not about making you suffer or teaching you a lesson. It's simply about protecting themselves. It's about recognizing that you're not safe for them anymore, and choosing to prioritize their own well-being over the relationship. And once Pisces makes that choice, once they've decided that protecting themselves is more important than maintaining the connection, nothing you say or do will change their mind. Because here's the thing about Pisces that most people don't understand. Their forgiveness isn't weakness. Their compassion isn't naivety. Their willingness to give second chances isn't because they're pushovers. It's because they genuinely believe in people's capacity to grow and change. They genuinely want to see the best in everyone. They genuinely hope that people will rise to meet their potential. But when you prove over and over again that you're not going to rise, when you show them that you're committed to staying exactly as you are regardless of how it impacts them, Pisces accepts that. They stop hoping you'll change. They stop waiting for you to become who they need you to be. They accept you exactly as you are, and they remove themselves from the equation. And that's not a grudge. That's not bitterness. That's just reality. That's Pisces finally seeing you clearly and making a decision based on that clarity. They're not angry at you for being who you are. They're just no longer willing to sacrifice their own peace and well-being to accommodate who you are. I've seen this pattern play out countless times. And what strikes me most is how Pisces processes these unforgivable acts internally before anyone else even realizes something has shifted. They don't announce their decision. They don't send you a breakup text explaining exactly what you did wrong. They just quietly recalibrate their entire relationship with you, and by the time you notice the distance, they've already moved through all the stages of grief and arrived at acceptance. And here's what I think is the most misunderstood aspect of how Pisces holds these boundaries. People interpret their withdrawal as passive aggression or emotional manipulation. They think Pisces is punishing them by going cold, that they're playing games or trying to make them feel guilty. But that's not what's happening at all. Pisces isn't trying to hurt you. They're not trying to teach you a lesson. They're simply protecting themselves from someone who's proven they can't be trusted with their heart. What looks like a grudge from the outside is actually just Pisces finally choosing themselves. And that's revolutionary for a sign that spent their entire life choosing everyone else. Because here's the thing about Pisces that nobody talks about. Their capacity for forgiveness isn't infinite because they're saints. It's infinite because they're terrified of being alone. They're terrified of being seen as the bad guy. They're terrified of giving up on people because what if they were wrong? What if that person could have changed? What if they're being too harsh? So Pisces gives chance after chance after chance. Not because they're naive, but because they're fighting against their own knowing. They're fighting against the part of them that already sees the truth. They're hoping desperately that they're wrong, that this person will prove them wrong, that their intuition for once will be mistaken. But it never is, and eventually, the weight of ignoring their own knowing becomes heavier than the fear of being alone. That's when the shift happens. That's when Pisces stops fighting their intuition and starts trusting it completely. And once they cross that threshold, once they stop trying to convince themselves that you're better than you've shown yourself to be, there's no going back. Because they're not just letting go of you. They're letting go of the version of you they wanted you to be. They're letting go of the potential they saw in you. They're letting go of the relationship they hoped you could have together. And that grief, that process of mourning what could have been, that's what Pisces does in silence before they ever pull away. By the time you feel the distance, they've already cried all the tears. They've already processed all the pain. They've already accepted that you are, and who you are isn't safe for them. So when you finally notice that something's changed, when you finally realize that Pisces isn't as warm or open or available as they used to be, they're already on the other side of it. I've talked to so many people who've been on the receiving end of this Pisces withdrawal, and they all say the same thing. They didn't see it coming. One day everything seemed fine, and the next day Pisces was different. Polite but cold, still present but emotionally absent. And they can't figure out what they did wrong because Pisces won't tell them. Pisces won't engage in the conversation about what happened. They just smile and say everything's fine and continue being cordial while maintaining an impenetrable emotional wall. And that drives people crazy. Because they want the confrontation. They want the chance to explain themselves. To defend their actions. To convince Pisces that they're wrong or overreacting or being too sensitive. But Pisces won't give them that opportunity. Because Pisces knows that conversation won't change anything. They know that no explanation will undo what's been done. They know that some things can't be talked through or reasoned away. What people don't understand is that by the time Pisces has withdrawn, they've already had that conversation with you 1,000 times in their head. They've already considered every possible explanation, every possible justification. Every possible reason why you did what you did. They've already given you the benefit of the doubt in every way they can imagine, and they've concluded that none of it matters. Because regardless of why you did it, the fact remains that you did it, and that fact has fundamentally changed how safe they feel with you. This is why trying to win back a Pisces after you've crossed one of these lines is nearly impossible. Because you're not just trying to repair the specific incident. You're trying to undo their entire internal process of coming to terms with who you really are. You're trying to convince them to ignore their intuition, to override their knowing, to go back to hoping you'll change when they've already accepted that you won't. And Pisces won't do that. Not anymore. Because here's what happens when Pisces finally stops giving chances. They don't become bitter or cynical or closed off to everyone. They just become more selective. They raise their standards. They trust their intuition more quickly. They're less willing to ignore red flags or make excuses for people's behavior. They become protective of their peace in a way they never were before. I've noticed this evolution in Pisces who've been burned by these unforgivable acts. They don't lose their compassion or their empathy or their ability to see the good in people. But they develop this fierce boundary around their inner world. They become very clear about who gets access to their vulnerability, who gets to know their dreams, who gets to see them at their most tender. And if you've proven you can't be trusted with those things, you simply don't get access anymore. What's fascinating is that this doesn't make Pisces cold or hard. They're still kind. They're still helpful. They'll still show up for you in practical ways. But the emotional intimacy is gone. The soul connection is severed. You've been moved from the inner circle to the outer ring. And that's where you'll stay, forever. And here's what I think is the saddest part of all of this. Most people who've been cut off by a Pisces never fully understand why. They know something changed, but they don't know what. They might have theories or guesses, but Pisces rarely explains. Because, what would be the point? If you were capable of understanding why what you did was so devastating, you wouldn't have done it in the first place. If you were capable of seeing Pisces clearly enough to honor their reality, you would have been doing that all along. So Pisces doesn't waste energy trying to make you understand. They just accept that you don't. That you can't. That you never will. And they move forward without you. Not with anger or resentment, but with this quiet, sad wisdom that some people are only meant to be in your life for a season. And when that season ends, when someone shows you they can't hold your heart with care, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is let them go. I think what makes these unforgivable acts so painful for Pisces is that they represent a fundamental betrayal of trust. Not just trust in the other person, but trust in their own judgment. Because Pisces chose to let you in. They chose to be vulnerable with you. They chose to believe in you. And when you weaponize that vulnerability, or dismiss their reality, or abandon them when they need you, you're not just hurting them. You're making them question their ability to choose safe people. And that's self-doubt. That questioning of their own intuition. That's what takes the longest to heal. Because Pisces can forgive you for hurting them. They can understand that you're flawed and human and capable of causing pain. But forgiving themselves for not seeing it coming, for ignoring the red flags, for hoping you were different than you turned out to be, that's much harder. This is why Pisces often goes through a period of intense self-reflection after one of these betrayals. They're not just processing what you did, they're processing how they allowed it to happen. They're examining every moment leading up to the betrayal, looking for the signs they missed, the warnings they ignored, the intuitive hits they overrode, and they're making a commitment to themselves that they'll never ignore those signs again. That's the real transformation that happens when Pisces experiences one of these unforgivable acts. They don't just lose trust in you, they learn to trust themselves more deeply. They learn that their intuition was right all along. They learn that when something feels off, it is off. They learn that their emotional reality is valid even when other people dismiss it. They learn that their vulnerability is precious and should only be shared with people who've proven they can handle it with care. And once Pisces learns those lessons, once they've integrated the wisdom into their being, they become almost impossible to manipulate or gaslight advantage of, because they're no longer fighting against their own knowing. They're no longer trying to see the best in people at the expense of seeing the truth. They're no longer sacrificing their peace to maintain relationships that don't serve them. This evolution is beautiful to witness, even though it's born from pain. Because what emerges is a Pisces who's still compassionate and empathetic and kind, but who's also boundary and discerning and self-protective. They haven't lost their softness. They've just learned to be soft with people who've earned it. They haven't become hard or cynical. They've just become wise. And that wisdom, that hard-won understanding of who deserves access to their inner world and who doesn't, that's what allows Pisces to finally have the kinds of relationships they've always deserved. Relationships built on mutual respect and reciprocal vulnerability and genuine care. Relationships where their intuition is honored, their emotional reality is validated, and their loyalty is matched. Because here's the truth that Pisces eventually learns. The right people won't make you feel crazy for being intuitive. They won't weaponize your vulnerability. They won't abandon you in your moments of need. The right people will see your sensitivity as a gift, not a burden. They'll honor your emotional depth instead of dismissing it. They'll show up for you the way you've always shown up for them. And once Pisces experiences that kind of relationship, once they know what it feels like to be truly seen and valued and cherished, they become even less willing to tolerate anything less. Because they finally understand that being alone is better than being with someone who makes you feel alone. That solitude is better than companionship that requires you to abandon yourself. That no relationship is better than a relationship that slowly erodes your sense of self. So if you're someone who's been cut off by a Pisces, if you're experiencing that cold distance where warmth used to be, I want you to understand something. This isn't about you being a terrible person. This isn't about Pisces being unforgiving or holding grudges. This is simply about incompatibility at the deepest level. You and Pisces have fundamentally different ways of moving through the world. Fundamentally different values around vulnerability and intuition and loyalty. And Pisces has accepted that those differences are too vast to bridge. And if you're a Pisces reading this, if you're recognizing yourself in these patterns, I want you to know that your boundaries are valid. Your decision to protect yourself is not only justified, it's necessary. You're not being too sensitive or too harsh or too unforgiving. You're simply honoring your own needs and your own reality, and that's not just okay, it's essential. Because at the end of the day, what looks like Pisces holding a grudge is actually Pisces finally holding a boundary. What looks like enforgivances is actually self-preservation. What looks like coldness is actually clarity. And what looks like Pisces giving up on someone is actually Pisces finally choosing themselves. And that choice, that decision to prioritize their own well-being over maintaining a relationship that hurts them, that's not a grudge. That's growth. That's wisdom. That's Pisces finally understanding that their compassion doesn't have to be infinite.